allflinttv.com,
AllPointTV.
allpointtv.com. I'll get it straight eventually. Only takes me a little while. I'm a slow. I was been sitting in the back of the class. I want to thank you for tuning in. We're going to pick up where we were last week. We were trying to finish up a few things about the situation going on in terms of this war, and I think we have gotten most of it wrong because we listen to these commentators on places like Fox. It doesn't really matter which one you listen to. Most of them are nothing but propaganda machines. And if you listen to Fox or certainly listen to CNN and MSNBC, they're so bad and they lost so many viewers that they're now they got to change their name and hide out under another umbrella as if that's going to change the format of the content of what they're covering on that network. But it doesn't really matter. If you've been listening to the news, you've been brainwashed. And I want to try to come behind what they're saying and try to clean this up because this is not Putin's war. This is NATO's war. And I want to make that very clear that NATO is the instigator in this war. And it doesn't take any genius to figure this out. All you have to do is get a map out and look at where the North Atlantic Treaty Organization started with 12 nations in 1949. And then look where NATO is now, inching on the doorstep of Russia. And then you're going to claim that this is Putin's aggression. And you're right there at the man's doorstep and they were throwing a red flag. They really were throwing red meat to Putin during the Biden administration. You might have seen where they had them kind of throwing this red meat out there saying that they wanted to bring Ukraine into NATO. And of course, that's going to be red flag because how did you feel when they had missiles in Cuba in 1962 and there was 90 miles off the coast of Florida, and this is right next door to Russia, but they're supposed to take NATO on this border without any outcry about it. And they knew that was not going to be tolerated. They were trying to drag Russia into this conflict. And I want to tell you what they're doing with it as well, because if you've been paying attention to some of the things been coming out, because we're in a lot of news now about what they're doing behind the scenes. And what they're doing behind the scenes is that they are pushing these countries around the world a little bit at a time, further and further and further left. I was amazed at one of the programs that they aired on. I forget the program that it was on, but it was very intriguing about the information that this program shared, because I could see how that fit into what I have been watching, and that is that these governments, in other words, these elections in these governments, they're all rigged, but they're not rigged just for the fact of rigging them. They're rigging these elections toward an intent, and what the intent is to, because you're not because these countries are not really what would you call it, center left. They're not. The countries are not center. This country is not center left. This country is center right. But the voting for example, in 2020, the voting was center left, and when and that's because when we went to bed and we saw the outcome from what the voting totals were at that point, we saw the outcome was going to be a landslide, 12 million more votes for Trump than he got in 2016. In 2020, he got 12 million more votes, 75 million votes. And we saw the indicators were these outliers like Pennsylvania and some of the other outliers that you can kind of tell if they get those states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, some of the what you would call states, and the outlying states are the ones that are the purple states. You need those states in order to win, because the room for error otherwise is very narrow for if you're running Republican, because the large states, California and New York, the two coastal states. One, I think that if it's going to change this time because the census has changed, but I think last time California, for example, had 55 electoral votes. It won't be 55 this time because so many people electing. They say you can't even get a U-Haul in California now. People are trying to get out of there because the governance is so bad. And then in New York, where you're getting ready to elect in the city of New York, the largest city in the country, this communist, Joran Danny, and they're getting ready to elect him. But in the between the two extreme, where you have the California on the left coast, and then on the other left coast, they both they call them left coast now. But on the two left coasts, you have New York to the east, and then you have on the other left coast, you have California, and 55 electoral votes for California. Let's see, New York has, I don't want to misquote it, but I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think New York has 38, 29, 30, somewhere around there. And when you get those two states, you have a lot to make up for. And so the smaller states, you may carry a number of them, but they got to make, if you're going with Rhode Island, what Rhode Island has, 3 electoral votes, and you get states like that, even Wyoming, the state that this woman came from and thought they were going to tolerate her nonsense, talking about this Cheney, and they threw her out. 46% difference between her vote to keep her there, and the ones that threw her out, she lost by the largest percentage of any incumbent I think they've had in the history of politics in the United States. They just threw her out of there, that she gonna get in there and act that contemptuously of the voters. But you take a number of the smaller states. If you don't carry Texas, you don't carry California, you don't carry New York, Pennsylvania. Let's see some of the others that are a relatively large number of electoral votes because of the population. Then you got to carry. You can get the popular vote and still lose the elections. What I'm saying, because you got to make up a lot of ground once those states are not carried. But when I went to bed, when we went to bed in 2020, and we saw how the trends were, and we look at trends like what's happening in Pennsylvania, for example, what's happening in Georgia. And in Pennsylvania, that lead that Trump had when we went to bed, I mean, I went to bed late, but I'm saying there's no way in the world that this election can be won by Biden, because the difference that he had to make up in Pennsylvania, for example, was insurmountable. That lead was so humongous that there was no way for it to be made up in the time they had if they're going to count the ballots. But then while we were sleeping, something else happened, and when we got up, we found the same thing that they found, quite frankly, in 1948, when people went to bed thinking that Truman had lost the election and Dewey had won. Papers came out, New York Times came out the next day and said Dewey wins, and then papers on the street were announcing Dewey's win, and then later on it was contravened by the vote that began to be tallied later on. Wherever those votes came from is up to a question. But we didn't question everything at that time. And so Truman, as unpopular as he was, and of course the vote was going against him, and then when they got the next morning, everybody was convinced that he had lost the election because all the trends, all the indicators were that he was doing very badly in terms of the pre-polling that occurred before the election, only to find out that people's lying eyes were lying again, and so on and so forth. And we were so naive, we believed that they were actually carrying we were actually voting for these people, and they were getting a correct and accurate count, only to find out that our naivety, they were making use of it and giving us the outcome that was predetermined regardless of how we voted. They were going to determine the vote. This was the deep state in operation. And we didn't even recognize it as such until we heard Eisenhower warning against it January the 17th, 1961, when we can remember one thing he talked about in that speech, that farewell speech that he gave 3 days before the next president, who would be John F. Kennedy, was inaugurated. But what Eisenhower said in his farewell speech is a warning that he saw power, whether salt or not salt, was budging up in the country, posing a threat to, and this is their word. I don't use the word so much because it's not really intended, but they keep saying it's a threat to our democracy. I don't know. I don't, people say these things, and I cannot understand what it is they're talking about when they say things like that, because the word is not used one time in the Declaration of Independence. You ever heard of that document? It is not used not a single time in the Constitution of the United States. You never heard of that document also. And these scholars need to not only hear about it, but start to read it and understand it. Because I'm convinced they don't understand the document from what I'm hearing. They don't understand this document. They're saying all these things about it and making up this stuff out of whole cloth, and they can get away with the layman. They cannot get away with it here, and they don't try to get and they don't try to get away with it here because they know, and they're not on this level. I tell them that to their face. They know that. They don't say one thing. They don't agree with me. In private, they say that. In public, they don't say anything because they are not on this level. I don't care what they say. They are not on this level. And you can make that stuff up for a lot of people. You can't do it here. You cannot do that here. And so these elections, 1948 was a case in point, and the papers coming out and saying one result, because that should have been the result. Truman should have lost that election by the popularity he had at that point in time. He should have lost that election in a landslide, and they had no problem believing he had lost. That's what they put early in the early edition. The early edition New York Times, they're out on the street selling that paper. Dewey wins. Dewey wins. Only to find out later on they got to retract the early edition and come out and say that it wasn't Dewey that won after all. It was Harry S. Truman that won. But we were naive. We didn't think anything of it. We thought we were getting fair returns in our elections and things of that sort. But we didn't. A lot of it's because the history of the country is not taught. The history of the country is absolutely not taught in these schools. I'll be writing about some of that later on, and I'm gonna say some things here on in the press, in my part of the press, that nobody's ever said before, because I have to go and tell the country why it is that this war became a war, quote unquote, a war to free the slaves, and what that is about. Because this war is not a war to free the slaves. This is a war of whites being turned on other whites in this country. And they had to make it about something different because Lincoln, number one, had won the election with a minority of the popular vote. And he only had 40% of the vote. He won the election. I'm not saying he didn't win the election, but he get one single electoral vote in the South, not one. And if you go back, I don't want to get too far off my subject, but you go back to the senatorial race he had with Stephen A. Douglas in 1858, which is why Obama, by the way, is standing out there on the courthouse steps, on the old courthouse steps in Springfield, Illinois, which used to be the state courthouse, and made his announcement of running for president in 2007. You know, Obama was on the steps of that state house, February the 10th, 2007, and I saw it for what it was, and I said so at that point in time. But I excused it at that time because I thought we needed something new, and John McCain was not something new, was something that was old and very old, and that oldness the kind of oldness that was in place that tired the country out and worn the country out. And I thought it was time for something new. And I thought that at least we would have that. But I never believed in anything that Obama said or even the manner in which he said it. And I came out after voting for the man in 2008. I came out against him in 2010 and said, no, we are not paying for that. I knew John McCain was not the man for the job in 2008. But I was yet to find out that that was also true of Barack Obama. When I found out to be true, I came out against him and did so. Probably the earliest one to come out who was a supporter prior to, not a supporter, but a voter, not a supporter. I didn't believe in the things this man was talking about, and I don't believe any of these politicians. They all are talking the same stuff. They only disagree about how the kitty is going to be divided. This is about power and money. And what they're fighting over is how that power is to be distributed and how the money is to be distributed. What part of the aisle is to be paid off? Because that's what our voting is about. It's not about allowing the electorate to speak at the polls. And when I saw this one video about a week and a half ago, it was absolutely stunning as to how the voting is processed around into different parts of the world. Everybody's looking at Russia interference. I look at that now as a distraction. It's not Russia. Of course, they want to. If Russia was trying to interfere with the election in 2016, I'll tell you right now, they were trying to fudge that election on behalf of Hillary Clinton. All the evidence is very clear. Of course, they try to pick winners and losers. They have the person wanted in power. They wanted Hillary Clinton in power in 2016, not Trump. And then they wanted Hillary in there because they already had figured out who she was, and also the psychological problem this woman has. This woman has a lot of problems. You might recall she couldn't even come down and announce the concession. She was so broken up. She found out they could not finesse the vote in 2016, and she was so broken up about it and pitching a tantrum behind the scenes and couldn't compose herself. They couldn't send her out there to the press, where the press could see her. They sent what's his name? Paganis? What's that guy's name? They sent him down there to make the announcement. She was too broken up to do it. She was plus the fact that they were calling around to find out if there was anything they could do at the midnight hour to change the outcome of the election, and found out they could not do it without exposing themselves because they had not pre-planned for what happened. They were so convinced of their own narrative that Trump had no shot. They didn't have a counter plan in place, thinking she's going to blow them away. They were even predicting she'd get 400 electoral votes. You only need 270, but they were saying the man's going to get 400 electoral votes. Trump would be glad to have gotten 100, and the other remaining, there are 538 of them, so the remaining 138 electoral votes, they didn't get that, he would have done well. And they never saw what was really happening because they were blinded by their narrative. But this is the way elections are held in this country. We don't have fair elections in the United States. And we need to stop saying things like this is not supposed to happen in America. What do you think has been happening? Open your eyes up. You might want to take a peek. It's not supposed to happen in America. Why not? Have you looked at the election of 1800 between Jefferson and Adams, where Adams was usurped upon and thrown out? After about 35 battles, it went back and forth, making backroom deals and this and give us that and so on. And after 35 ballots, they finally decide that Adams got to go. That was in 1800. That was the third election after the third election they held in this country. Two for the great George Washington, where George Washington had won unanimous by electoral votes twice, both in the first of his election and then in 1792, where it happened again, where he won unanimously in the second one. Of course, the 10 of the 13 states voted, but he got all the electoral votes were cast on two occasions. Nobody's going to challenge that because there was a unanimity involved in it. But when Adams came in, the persona was different, and they had a contested election, particularly when Adams was the was one of the revolutionaries, one of the persons was supposed to be one of the co-writers of the Declaration of Independence, and they had him there as a stand-in as the vice president under George Washington. So they went to him coming through Washington, what Washington stood for, and they put the vice president up there as the the heir apparent to George Washington, put him in there. But then when he got in there and showed that he was not the person that was speaking the same way inside, they were speaking on the outside, and they came against him. Madison came against him. That's for sure. And Jefferson came against him. And the two of them together, with the clout they had, were able to pull certain strings behind the behind the scenes, and that cabal that they had, that coalition they had formed, and respect they had, and the collusion that was going on behind the scenes, had discombobulated the way the election should have been here, where Adams was thrown out of office. And of course, Adams was so put off by it, knowing he had been there'd been a one-upmanship to throw him out of power. He left town, I think about 4 o'clock that morning. Didn't even wait around for the inaugural address of Jefferson. Left out of the country. And by the way, these two men didn't speak for how many years was it? More than a decade, where they didn't speak to each other. And as fate would have it, they died on the same date, on the same day, July the 4th, 1826. And Adams died first, and his words that Jefferson survives me. Yeah, but only by a couple of hours, because Jefferson died later on that same day. And it's an irony, but the elections that we have in this country didn't start being usurped overnight, such as in the Kennedy election in 1960. We now know that was taken. And we also know that Kennedy was taken out because he got in there and began to finesse those who put him in power. And he went after some people that claimed they were the main ones that installed him into the Oval Office. One of those units was the mafia, and they played a role in it. But also the ones watching what he was doing were those that were in this thing that Eisenhower was talking about in 1961, when he's talking about the military. Listen to this carefully now. Military industrial complex, the two power centers, military and industrial, and that coagulation of interest was what was watching what was being done, and Kennedy stepped on the toes of those people in those two groups, and they put a hit on Kennedy. That's what happened to Kennedy. And I know what you're saying about it. Somebody better start listening to what I'm saying. This was a coup d'etat in this country. And you can just shut up already about saying things like, this is not supposed to happen here. Where is it supposed to happen, you think? In a third world country, right? Well, what do you think this country is? It's a third world country that doesn't have third world nuclear. It does not have third world power. That's the difference between the two. Other than that, the difference is minuscule, and that difference is covered. The minuscule difference is covered up by the amount of debt this country has accumulated, because the debt is the facade that this country is a wealthy country. It's a third world country economically. And you try to figure out, send it to Washington if you get some ideas about it. Try to tell them how to dig out of the debt they admit to, which they now have to admit to, about a debt now national debt of about $40 trillion. For every $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. There are 40 of those they have to admit to, but it's even higher than that. Somebody wrote me the other day, I must tell you, and was saying to me, uh, one of my friends was saying they raised the debt ceiling again. Yeah, they raise it again. Have to raise it every time it comes up and they reach the ceiling, which they will if reach. No matter what ceiling they set, it will be reached. But the minute that they do not go beyond the ceiling they reached last time, the collapse will be instantaneous to the time in which they try to turn back the clock so that the raising the debt ceiling will not occur. Once it does not occur, the collapse will occur. And that can only be true because the implosion of the economy has already happened in this country, and the debt is what's propping it up. You can take what I'm saying and let it alone. I have a degree in this as well, and I'll tell you that you cannot fix a problem by making the debt the solution to fixing the problem. The problem is the debt, and using debt to fix it cannot be done. Anybody, do you pay? I tell you what I want you to do. Try to use another credit card to pay off this credit card comes in. See if you can use the credit card that you charge on to pay that credit card debt off with another credit card and see if they'll take it. They won't take it, but ask yourself the question why? Because they know they don't tell it to you, but they know you can't pay debt off by uh, by creating more debt. So they don't let you do it. Try it sometime. Try to use. I have 4 credit cards. I know how to use them. I use their money, but I don't pay any interest on the credit cards. But just for your own enlightenment, try to do what the governor's doing. But you do it in this way here. You go to your creditor that you have a credit card from them, and you tell them, and you put the card down there, and you say, "I want to pay off this month the credit card debt, and I want to put it on this card here, and see if they'll take that." I already know what they're going to do. They're not going to take it because they're not going to let you pay debt off with debt. Yet that's exactly what the government does, and it's not to be allowed because you can't pay debt off with debt. Can the people in Washington that's in the Congress understand that? Because that's what they're trying to do. They think they can pay debt off by creating more debt. All you're doing is digging the ditch a lot deeper by doing that. So you got to understand that we are in a topsy-turvy, upside down country today, and everything. We are living in George Orwell's America. What's up is down, what's down is up. And now they got to looking sideways, and we can't figure out anything that's going on because we're the most lied to country on the planet. There are people who actually believe that Putin started this war. Why? Because he was the first, because he went into Ukraine. Yeah, you can make that claim, but I'll tell you this. The reason why they put those missiles in Cuba in 1962 is because the U.S., the CIA, and the rest of them had threatened to go into Cuba and throw Castro out of power. And Castro allowed Khrushchev to install nuclear weapons in Cuba as a deterrent to that invasion they had planned, because it had to be a pig's invasion. They were trying to topple him there. This was a CIA operation. And that operation really is one part of the puzzle of why Kennedy was killed. Because that operation was put in place under Eisenhower and under Richard Nixon. Go read Russ Baker's book. These are documents here. I'm not talking off the. This is not from the skin of my hat. This is documented. They were going. Kennedy was supposed to give cover to the Bay of Pigs invasion, and they thought they had the cover, which had been planned. The operation had been planned under Eisenhower and Nixon, and they thought they had the military cover they needed in the Air Force, and they're going to go in there and throw Castro out of power. But Castro was waiting for him, and the word had not gotten down. He had told Allen Dulles, and people need to read the books on those 2 brothers. Allen Dulles, who's head of the CIA, and then his brother, uh, John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower. And look at what they were doing from behind the scenes. These are two of the most dangerous non-elected officials this country has produced. Both of them were dangerous, and they were running from behind the scenes. A lot of things were being run through them. And when Kennedy fired Allen Dulles, which he should have done, but you don't fire Allen Dulles and then get in an open air limousine and ride down the street, and you fire the director of the CIA, and you're gonna ride down the street without that bubble, which would not have even happened in Dallas if that rain had continued and they had to put the bubble top over. He would not have been killed in Dallas, but he's going to be killed because we were following him every city he went into. Has anybody written about that? Every city he went into, they were following this man. They were plotting against him. And what I found out this past weekend that really shocked me was that they're following Trump around in Latin America. Everybody's looking at Russia, right? You got them looking at Russia. The real problem is in Latin America because that's where they route the vote around. You think they count the vote? It's a lot to what is going on here. But the vote is not even counted in the United States. They have offshore voting. They look at the trends that are going on. Every 100 or so votes in this area, 100 or so votes. They take that and look at the count. And they can see what the pattern is, and they're determining what needs to be done based on these algorithms. And they began to do things, not even sometimes in this country, but being done outside the country where they're doing the tabulating. And I can tell you this, and this is, as God is my witness, I'll tell you this. As long as you have those voting machines, it's impossible to have an honest election in this country. And Donald Trump was trying to warn about that in 2020 because he saw what was getting ready to happen, and it did happen. And I was amazed. I wasn't surprised. I was amazed that this man would have the courage to say what he said last week when he came out and said that Obama was a trigger person and that Obama should be put in prison for treason. That's true. And I'm writing about it. I did a 3-part series on it. Obama should be put on trial. And I'll give Tulsi Gabbard, who has probably the most integrity, a little bit more integrity than Pam Bundy has, but this woman has a lot of integrity, a boatload of integrity. This woman put on Pam Bundy's desk her investigation of what occurred in 2020 and what's going on behind the scenes, because she put a team together and they were all exploring what was going on in different corridors of where these operations these operations are taking place from, and had them working from different places and putting a puzzle together. And they were able to see what was really going on. And then when that information was amassed from a lot of different vantage points, a lot of committees working on it. There were some by Tulsi Gabbard. She put the information that had been amassed on Pam Bundy's desk. I'm now waiting to see what she's going to do with it. But if they do what they should do with it, all that would be a trial, and it should lead to a trial of Barack Obama, but it will not necessarily lead to him being convicted, because there's another problem here we got in this country, and that is the partisan courts that we have and these partisan judges. And if you put it in federal court, it's going to be in Washington, where 90-some-odd% of the people are Democrats. So you got that problem to deal with. And the idea of a fair trial, a trial by an impartial jury, where are you going to find that? In places like New York. Do you think Trump found it in New York? You think that Trump could find it in Chicago, Illinois, let's say Illinois, or could find it in any of the blue states? What state could Trump get a fair trial in a single one of the blue states? Can he get it in Delaware? Now I'll tell you what Baldwin told me back in the day. It's like he told me, I asked him a question, he asked me, he said, "Are you kidding?" That's what I would say to you. Do you think you can get a fair trial? That Trump can get a fair trial in the blue state? Look what they did in New York. where you set this fatso down, Letitia James, who needs to be, they need to go after her, not to retaliate and create more lawfare, but to go after her for what she did, thinking she would be able to get away with it. And this is why this is why they caught Barack Obama and the rest of them, all of them, Brennan, Clapper, you name them. This guy, that Christopher Wray has not been found in any of the mix. But what about James Comey? Ray is in it too, but look at James Comey. All these persons should be in prison. They didn't, but they never thought that the security files would ever be such that we turn over before the burn bags. You had burn bags. Have you heard about the burn bags? They had burn bags. And this stuff was supposed to have been shredded and burned and so on. And these burn bags did not get burned because some people apparently thought that might implicate them into a felony. And they did not burn the evidence. And that's the evidence they were going through, trying to figure out and putting this puzzle together. What really happened here? And what happened here was this third world country, the United States of America, was operating as it has operated for a while now. I don't mean like last Tuesday. I don't mean started in 1948 either. This stuff started in the 19th century. And when I get around to doing a piece on this guy that everybody wants to claim is the greatest president this country has had, when I do an expose on him using, for example, De Lorenzo's work, Lincoln Unmasked, and then the other book he put out about Lincoln called The Real Lincoln. Not that I need those books to put my information together, but about Lincoln, but because I use the Southern information. Written one book called The South Was Right. That's a book got to be read. Written by the Kennedy brothers, Donald and Ronald Kennedy from North Carolina. And they have a book out, should be read, because it gives you a very good idea of what the South was really doing. And what they really were doing was trying to refine what this country was doing and return it back to its source, which is something that's got to be done if we're going to save the country. It's got to be returned back to the source. But that is what they were trying to do. Return it back to those that were the founding fathers of the country with the flaws they put in place, thinking they would be corrected by passing it down so other generations would have more time to figure some other things out and then get rid of some things they want to get rid of. But you have to let some of it, you have to fix some of it now, put things in place to allow the rest to be fixed later on. And they did that. If you read the Constitution, understand it as well as if you can understand it as I do, and I'm the only one in the country that understands it. I say that, and people get you like that and all the rest, but do they say anything about it? Let them show me that I'm wrong. I say it out there so I say it out there so they can prove me to be wrong, but they're not going to be able to do it. And I throw it out there every week to show them, to challenge them to do it. I'm trying to get them out to come out of the woodwork to show me they can do that. And I do it every other week or every week almost, because I'm trying to flush them out, to come out and fight. You're saying these things on TV. You say it here. What, the cat got your tongue? Are you afraid to come out here to be exposed that you don't know what you're talking about? Or maybe you do know, but you're not saying what you know out here in public. Because there are a lot of things that you say. Mark Levine, for example. You got to be kidding me. Having Newt Gingrich on there and things like that, and you come out there and say stuff like the president can have the order pen as long as he's present when the order pen is being used. Where is that in the Constitution, Mark Levine? You can say that to the layman. You say it here, and I'm gonna tell you right now, I'm gonna curse you out. I don't use profane language. But if you insult me that way, because I'm not a peer, I'm above you. You said to me, I'm cursing you out because you know better. You don't know better to do it there. You know better to do it here. If you do it and demean me and insult me that way, I'm not going to be a happy camper because you know better than do that here. Because you know what's here, and you're not going to do it. But you said to me, to my face, what you're saying on TV, that as long as the president's present and sitting there, the order pen can be used to sign an official document. What the order pen can be used to save the president's hand, where you're signing autographs. Of course, order pen can be used. It can be used when you're having these shirts that say, "Make America Great Again." If you have a shirt and you want to sign the shirt and send it out there to your followers and your supporters, you can do that. But official documents, and you're going to have that done by the order pen, provided the president is sitting there. If the president can sign the document, why is he sitting there using the order pen to do it? Until he signs it, we don't know if he agrees with it or not. We want him to sign it, whether it's at the point of a gun or not. We want his signature on an official document, and that's required by the Constitution of the United States. And I don't care what scholar in this country, semi-scholar in this country, would say otherwise. And if they come against what I'm saying, they are pseudo scholars. And they would not say one thing behind what I'm saying. And I will tell you why they won't see it. Because they're not qualified. If you think they're qualified, here I stand. They're not going to do it. They absolutely are not going to do it. These elections in this country are not what we think they are. And this democracy that they keep talking about, democracy is a threat to our. They keep saying that, and every time they're saying it, people should raise their eyebrow and ask the question: why are they saying that when the word is not mentioned in either of the two founding documents of the United States? And what's up with that? And why didn't the framers use that word if that is what they put in place? Why didn't they say, in fact, come out and assert it? They asserted everything else they wanted to say.
Yeah, but one thing people don't realize too, in a democracy like in ancient Greece, they could actually ostracize people, vote to ostracize people, send people away, and stuff like that. Well, we value the individual's rights, so that's one of the reasons why we had a republic with the rule of law put in place. That's why, and the Democrats want, because you look, doesn't that sound really familiar to what our name is? Democracy. We're Democrats. We represent you. That's how their thinking is. That's what they.
It is but it's a tremendous cancellation of the founding documents of the country, because when we get up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, if you remember what you said in those elementary classes, you said, "I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands." You didn't say and to the democracy. "I pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic." And there's a quantum difference between a republic and a democracy. A democracy, by the way, and the reason why they didn't use it in either the two founding documents, because a democracy is a very dangerous thing. It's very dangerous. One professor, I think either at was it Wayne State or was it at Eastern? I think it was at Wayne State. Made the analogy of what would you think about democracy? What does the lamb think about democracy if the lamb is sitting at the table with two wolves, and the wolves are sitting over there salivating, and they got the fork and knife out, and they're saying, "Now, what are we gonna have for lunch?" There's two foxes there, two wolves there, and there's one lamb, and they're trying to decide what are they going to have for lunch. Let's see, what are they going to figure out here? And let's vote on that. Let's have a vote on what we have for lunch. And both the wolves are looking over there at the lamb, And if you have majority vote democracy and so on and so forth, there are 2 votes. They want lamb, and now we eat each other because what kind of meat would that be? So that's the analogy of democracy. You're just going by the popular vote. If that had been intended, they would have shown that in Article 2 of the Constitution by the Electoral College. In fact, there would have been no Electoral College because all they do there is just simply make sure the votes that were turned in, the popular votes that turned in, they will count them. But that's not what they did. They put a caveat in there to stop the popular vote from being the determining factor. And the genius, if they understood the Constitution, the genius of the Electoral College was that you want to, in fact, stop the danger of democracy without being an oppressor of the popular will. But there's a popular will, but you have to admit this, don't you? There's a popular will in each state. And the grandeur of the brilliant framers, the first intellectuals this country has produced, and so far the last, and none of them are at Harvard University, and none of them at Yale and Cornell and Preston and Brown, and certainly not at Berkeley. They're the first intellectuals this country has produced, and so far they're the last, and none of them are named Mark Levine and Rue, John Rue, and the rest of these persons they have on TV all the time. Where's some of the others? Alan Dershowitz, none of them are those persons. They're the first intellectuals this country has produced, and so far they're the last. And we need to stop talking about these intellectuals, these scholars, and call them intellectuals. They're not intellectuals, they're scholars. And most of them are liars. You can't make this stuff and claim that's in the Constitution of the United States. The document is written and you can go and read it for yourself, but they don't think you'll do that. And that's where you'll tell you such stupid stuff. They'll tell you stupid stuff like, the long as the president's sitting there like a person is stunned and don't know where he is, like Biden didn't know where he was. You want Biden sitting there, as long as he's present, they can order pin. As long as he's present, he wasn't present. Yep. There was not one day that Biden was present in the White House on his best day. Yeah, he was sitting there when he wasn't in Delaware on the beach. He was sitting there, but was he ever present in the presidential chair? He was never present. He wasn't in his mind to be, quote, present. But to be there and say you can sit there while somebody is signing it in your name, they can't show you that in the Constitution, but they can claim that because they know you're not going to check. But that is not true, and that is another way of saying that they can do what they're doing right now, which is they're finessing the American people and getting away with murder and how they are contemplating how they rule this country. Because this country is being ruled. It's not being run. It's not being governed. It's being ruled. And the deep state, you can keep looking for the deep state. Deep state is right in front of your face. Because the deep state is them. The intelligence community, those at the top and that head those agencies. In the Biden administration, it was the persons in that administration, as you can go on the line and name all of them. Because how had they been installed, you're not voting on them. And once they put Biden in there because they stole the election and gave it to Biden, because Biden did not win the election, and Donald Trump said that. And the question was whether or not he's going to leave. It would have been a mistake if he stayed, but he didn't. He did not stay. He left. But they were hoping to draw him in. Oh yeah, they were plotting because they knew that he knew that they had not lost the election. They were plotting against him. They already set the military up. They're going to take him out. Trump was smart enough. He outsmarted them. He did what they did not expect him to do. No, he didn't lose the election in 2020. That much is crystal clear. But Donald Trump left the White House, and that threw them for a loop because they knew you were confused about what had happened and didn't know what was going on because the American people have attention span of a gnat. And they can't pay attention enough to actually study anything and then look into it to find out what's really going on, so they can be led around like sheep, is what they're being led around like, because they are sheep. And so they had pushed it so that this man would make that mistake. And they claimed that the man was, in fact, hurting our democracy and would come against him because then the public is confused. They would see him staying in there beyond January the 20th, and they know you're not supposed to do that. Everybody knows the 20th is the day the president at 12 o'clock in the afternoon will, in fact, vacate the office. A new administration comes in, is installed at 12 noon by giving the inaugural address and so on in the office by this man standing up with his Bible. It will be the Quran before you know it, and pledge to uphold the Constitution, taking the 35 words in Article 2 of the Constitution, where he swears to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God. And they thought that Trump would refuse to stand down because why should he step down if he won the election, right? And with his bombastic personality, where this man wants to fight. If he believes in something, he fights for it. And he is dangerous when he's wrong because he fights what he believes in. But if his belief is wrong, he can be very dangerous because the man is true to his beliefs. He's not one. He's a politician. People say he's not he's a politician, but not a politician in the sense that he's up there lying for the sake of some advantage. He's not that kind of a politician. But you cannot be in politics and not be a politician. But I'm telling you, they were baiting him into a confrontation that he could not win. And they were waiting for him to make the mistake of being there 1 second after 12 noon. They were going to go in there and take him out under handcuffs because they want this man in prison. Because they understood the movement he had built. They knew you'd elect this man by 63 million votes in 2016 and had elected him by 12 million more votes in 2020. How many times have you seen that happen in a presidential election where the president has an incumbency position and his votes with a voting record now, with a actual record of accomplishment, mostly non-accomplishments, because most of these presidents are mediocre, because we produce mediocre people to go into politics, because what else are they going to do if they're not into politics, not going into any private sector? Who's going to hire them, and what can they do in setting up something for themselves? What do you think? Name any of them. What do you think Liz Cheney would do? What about Nancy Pelosi? What job? This guy over in New York. What about him? What about this guy in that wants to claim that he's an independent, and he's a socialist, and so on? So what about him, Bernard? You call him Bernie. You want Bernie Sanders? What would he be doing in the private sector? Who would hire this man? You think somebody would hire Jasmine Crockett? What about AOC, who was a bartender before she was a know-it-all congresswoman from New York? What was she doing before she got that soft cushion to land on? That now she's in the Congress making $174,000. None of it has ever been earned. What would Rashida Tlaib be doing? What would Umar Ilhan Omar be doing? What would what would be what would um, this guy that's the minority leader of the House from New York? What would he be doing? Jeffries. What what would any of them be doing? They'll be out there unemployed. And that's why these career politicians don't go home, because what are they going home to? They wouldn't have a job. Nobody gonna give these guys a job. They might consult with somebody because they know somebody on the Hill and they could be hired as a consultant, but not gonna do any work. What kind of work would they do? Nancy Pelosi, what kind of job you think she'll have? So in order, because of that, they rig these elections, because once the people vote and the vote is an honest and true vote, the people are not contented with what they're doing up there. We've been going back and forth from one party to another. Why do you think we're doing that? We tried this party, and they got us believing that you should only have two. So we tried this party for 4 years. It doesn't work out. We go then 4 years later to that party, and that doesn't work out. So we go back to this party. I mean, this is like playing tennis. Back and forth, over and over again, the same thing. And nobody can think of third party and make that work. Donald Trump ran third party, but he was smart enough not to run third party in a third party. He ran third party in the Republican Party. And they did not like the idea of that man outsmarting them in that respect. Because he said because he had to sit down. How many was it? 17 others? He had to sit down 17 others, because he didn't just get the nomination. He had to run through all the rest of them were there as blockers of his candidacy. He had to run through them and sit them down before he became the nominee. And he did that. Did you watch that? They kept watching this and kept denying what it meant. The man kept sitting down these seasoned politicians. They don't know anything. And they don't do anything. They have not solved one problem in Washington since they've been there. Okay, if you can name a problem they've solved, can you please write it down so you won't forget it, and make sure you send it up here? I can read it next week on the air. They don't govern anything. They don't solve anything. They don't do anything. And that's why it was so dramatic that Donald Trump did something that had never been done before. And that was to push these people aside in Washington, D.C., which is not a city, it's a district. And it's a federal district. And that makes it unlike any of those cities that you have. And the president did not need the approval of Muriel Bowser or those chumps that are sitting on the city council in Washington, D.C., simply dismissed them and pushed him to the side. Didn't even tell him he was coming in there, just went in and did it. And he had the power to do it based on Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States. Pushed Bowser to the side, and she couldn't do anything, and then pushed the city council out of the way, and then brought in the federal troops. And they are up here talking about he's a dictator, he's trying to take over power, blah, 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 because they want people to be covered, have their eyes covered, listen to that noise, covering their eyes up to what they should be able to see from a distance. And that is no muggings. The city is not running a clown show like a clown show. The criminals are not taking over the district like they were before the troops arrived there, and people can now go out and spend their money and have dinner with their wives and their families and so on and so forth, and they're not running that city anymore. They don't want you to see that. And now the pattern is, how does that pattern get duplicated? I have asked some ideas on that. I'll be speaking on that later on as well, within the framework of the Constitution, on how you deal with that, because it can be dealt with in the states also. I know you think they have to go in there and get permission from the governor and so on and so forth. I'm going to tell you what the Constitution requires. But what happened in the District of Columbia is definitely constitutional, because it's a District of Columbia and it's a federal district. And the president took that federal district over, and the president is running it and put troops there. And Bowser is shown for the inept politician that she is, because now that city in 5 days has become safe. And they don't want the American people to see that, because they don't want you to see how badly this country is being run. Because you've gotten further and further and further away from the framers of the United States. As long as you have done that, it would not pal your way back to the shores. This is going to continue to happen. And they fear Donald Trump, and they're trying to wait him out. They know that once this is over, he can't run again, and he will not be eligible to run again, because he's being blocked by the Constitution of the United States, by the 22nd Amendment of the United States. Blocked. And there's no wiggle room for him to run for a third term, because we blocked that when we saw what Roosevelt did, when Roosevelt got in there and wouldn't leave office. And we applied the standard of after 2 terms, which is a standard really was set by George Washington, the president, because George Washington did it voluntarily, and no one had to tell him to leave, because the man was a patriot and a statesman. He went there to do some work and calm things down and put things in place, and then when he did his work, he went home. The greatest president this country has produced. None like him. None in power will ever be in power like this man. I have to tell you, we had a coup d'etat in 2020, and we had coup d'etats before that. And they had planned a coup d'etat in 2024, but they could not get away with it because it was too big to rig. They thought about it, but then the whole ship comes down, and the exposure will be so grand that even the person that are blind could see it, and they did not want to risk that, because they thought they could simply just wait this guy out. And that's the fight we're looking at right now, waiting him out, because they know he can't run again, and so on. Okay, take my word for it. We're living in very dangerous times right now. And we're going to decide in this generation right now whether or not this republic, not this democracy, whether this republic will be able to stand. And it's got to stand up now during the term of Donald Trump. Because we cannot guarantee that it will be in place after Donald Trump leaves, because the rest of them are just the politicians in Washington taking up space and wasting our time. Okay, we got to get out of here. But I want you to follow your dream as always, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.